The morning light spilled softly across the wooden floorboards, stretching into long golden lines that shimmered through the stillness of the house. Outside, the air was calm. Only the sound of distant wind brushing against the maple trees disturbed the silence. Inside, everything seemed perfectly in place. Yet, somehow, everything also felt slightly off. Emily sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a half-empty cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The world outside moved at its own pace, cars passing by, children's laughter echoing faintly from somewhere down the street, but her own world had slowed into a quiet hum, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful at first, and then turns into something lonelier the longer it lingers. She had grown used to the quiet dot, her husband. Daniel was kind, dependable, and steady, the kind of man who believed in doing things right, in keeping promises, in never missing a day at work. Their life together was built on respect and gentle companionship. Yet sometimes when Emily looked across the dinner table and saw him lost in his phone or answering another late call, she couldn't help but feel like something invisible stood between them. Not anger, not distance. Just a soft space that neither of them knew how to fill anymore. She took another sip of the cold coffee and smiled faintly to herself. "You're being dramatic again," she whispered under her breath. She always said that when her thoughts drifted too far, but even as she said it, she couldn't help noticing how quiet her own voice sounded in the empty kitchen. On the counter sat a small vase with fresh tulips, a gift from Daniel before he left for his business trip that morning. "I'll only be gone for a week," he'd said with a reassuring smile. "Don't miss me too much." Chad laughed then, trying to sound lighthearted. "I'll try not to." But now, as the afternoon sun slowly began its descent, she realized she already missed the comfort of another heartbeat in the house. It wasn't that she was unhappy. Emily had a life many would envy. A warm home, a caring husband, and a steady rhythm to her days. But sometimes even the most perfect life can leave room for quiet longing, not for something new, but for something forgotten. She walked over to the bookshelf and ran her fingers along the rows of novels she hadn't opened in years. Her favorite one, an old hardcover she'd read when she was 19, fell open in her hands. Inside, pressed between the pages, was a photograph, her and Daniel on their honeymoon, both laughing under a sky full of salt and sunlight. She smiled, remembering the warmth of that day. How young and certain they both had been. Life has a way of changing without asking, she thought, just then. The doorbell rang. Startled, she placed the book down and walked toward the front door, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Through the glass, she saw a familiar figure standing outside, tall, relaxed, holding something in his hands. It took her a moment to recognize him. It was Ryan, Daniel's younger brother. She hadn't seen him in months. He had always been kind to her, gentle in the way he spoke, easy to talk to, with a quiet humor that made people feel comfortable. She opened the door with a surprised smile. "Ryan, what a nice surprise." "Come in." He smiled back, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "Hey, Emily, I hope it's okay I dropped by. I was in the area and thought I'd check in." "Course," she said warmly. "You're always welcome here." As he stepped inside, the air shifted, not in a dramatic way, but subtly, like when a window opens and lets in a new current of air. They sat in the living room, sunlight falling across the floor between them. Emily poured him a cup of coffee and tried to fill the silence with easy words. "How have you been? It feels like forever since we last talked." Ryan smiled softly. "Busy, mostly. You know how life gets?" He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the framed photos, moments frozen in laughter and sunlight. "You and Daniel seem happy," he said quietly. Emily nodded, though a small hesitation caught in her chest before she could speak. "We are," she replied. "We just both get caught up in things sometimes. Work, plans, life." He looked at her thoughtfully, but said nothing. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just full of something unsaid. Like two people remembering the same thing, but too polite to mention it. Outside, a light breeze stirred the trees, scattering the late afternoon light across the room. Emily noticed how calm Ryan looked, yet there was a weight behind his calmness, something thoughtful and careful. as if he had come for more than a casual visit. When their eyes met for a brief moment, she felt it, the faint sense that something important lingered beneath the surface. Something that had waited a long time to be spoken. Before she could ask, Ryan looked away and said gently, "There's actually something I've been meaning to talk to you about." Emily blinked, unsure whether to smile or brace herself. "Oh, what is it?" He hesitated, setting his coffee down on the table. The air seemed to still around them, soft, expectant, filled with the quiet sound of a ticking clock somewhere in the background. He took a slow breath. "It's something I should have said a long time ago." The tone in his voice wasn't heavy or dramatic, just honest, careful and deeply human, and in that moment, without knowing why, Emily felt her heart begin to beat. Just a little faster. The clock on the wall ticked softly, its rhythm blending with the hum of the afternoon light. Emily sat across from Ryan, still unsure what his words might mean. But before he could continue, her gaze drifted for a moment toward the window, and in that brief pause, her mind wandered back to a different time. It was strange how memories could rise without warning, how the heart sometimes reached backward, tracing the moments that quietly shaped it years ago. Before life settled into its quiet rhythm, Emily had been a dreamer. She had worked at a small bookstore downtown, a narrow, sunlit place filled with the smell of coffee and old paper. It wasn't glamorous, but she loved every inch of it. The sound of pages turning, the faint jazz playing from the old speaker near the counter, and the quiet comfort of strangers passing through. That's where she first met Daniel. He had come in one rainy afternoon, searching for a book on architecture. His smile had been gentle but certain, and his eyes carried that rare warmth that made her feel instantly seen. Over time, he kept returning, always finding excuses to ask for recommendations, even when he clearly didn't need them. Their friendship grew slowly, like this steady unfolding of a sunrise. They would talk about music, about their dreams, about the kind of home they hoped to build one day. And one evening, as they walked out of the shop under this same umbrella, Daniel looked at her and said, almost shyly, "You make ordinary days feel like something worth remembering." She hadn't realized until that moment how deeply she cared for him, too. Their love had been gentle from the start, never rushed, never loud. It was the kind of love that lived in small gestures. A note left on the counter, a late-night drive for no reason at all, laughter echoing through a half-empty apartment. But somewhere along the way, life began to fill their quiet spaces. Work became busier, responsibilities heavier, and time, that precious thing they once took for granted, began to slip away unnoticed. Emily often thought about that, especially now. She loved Daniel deeply, but sometimes she missed the simplicity of those early days, when love didn't have to compete with everything else. And then, one summer, Ryan entered their lives. He was Daniel's younger brother, visiting between jobs, spending a few months in town to figure things out, as he had put it. From the beginning, he carried a different kind of energy. Where Daniel was calm and methodical, Ryan was open and curious, always asking questions, always noticing details others overlooked. Emily remembered the first time she really talked to him. It was during a family dinner, long after everyone else had gone home. Ryan had stayed behind to help clean up, and they ended up sitting on the porch watching fireflies shimmer over the garden. He had asked her, "Do you ever feel like life moves too fast for your heart to keep up?" She had laughed softly, surprised by the honesty of his question. "All the time," she said. From then on, their conversations grew naturally, never too deep, never too personal, but always meaningful in small ways. They talked about books, about music, about how people change without realizing it. Sometimes he would share stories from his travels, the people he'd met, the places he'd loved. Emily never thought much of it then. He was Daniel's brother, kind, easy to talk to, and thoughtful in ways that made everyone feel understood. But looking back now, she realized those small moments had left gentle marks on her heart, not from longing, but from the simple beauty of being seen and understood. Eventually, Ryan moved away for work. The family gatherings grew less frequent, and life folded back into its usual rhythm. But every now and then, when she heard a certain song or smelled rain on the pavement, she would think of those summer nights, the laughter, The quiet. The feeling that time had paused just long enough for them to exist in a shared moment. Now, sitting across from him years later, that memory returned, not with regret, but with a quiet ache of nostalgia. Ryan was looking down, his hands resting on the coffee cup. "I've thought about this for a long time," he said softly. "Back then, when I stayed here, those were some of the calmest days of my life. I guess I never said thank you for that." Emily felt a warmth rise in her chest. Not discomfort, just empathy. "You don't have to thank me," she said gently. "You were part of those days too." Key smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I came today. To say it out loud. To stop carrying it like something unfinished." For a moment, the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock again. Outside. The light was shifting, late afternoon melting into gold. It filled the room in a quiet glow, washing over the framed photographs, the folded blankets, the untouched cup of tea still waiting near the window. Emily looked at Ryan and saw not the younger brother who had once been unsure of his place, but someone who had carried his heart carefully through the years, learning, changing, and finally finding the courage to speak. And in that quiet moment, she realized how deeply the past can echo, not to pull us backward, but to remind us of who we've been and how far we've become. The light outside had turned soft and amber, the kind that comes just before dusk when everything looks gentler and time seems to slow its breath. Ryan's words still hung in the air, fragile and sincere, like a note that hadn't yet faded. Emily sat quietly, trying to find the right response, though none seemed to fit. There was no anger, no confusion, just a quiet weight that made her chest tighten slightly. She understood what he meant without needing the exact words. Some things didn't require naming. "It's strange," she said finally, her voice low and calm. "How life keeps looping back, bringing people together again when you least expect it." Ryan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's life's way of finishing unfinished conversations." She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "Or maybe it's just reminding us what matters." The clock ticked softly in the background, the kind of sound you only notice when the rest of the world feels too still. Ryan leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He didn't look restless anymore, only thoughtful. "When I walked up to the door today, said I wasn't sure if I should knock. I thought maybe too much time had passed, that it would feel wrong or awkward. But it doesn't," Emily said gently. He nodded. "No, it feels like home in a strange way." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The light in the room grew softer, wrapping the space in gold. Through the open window came the faint sound of distant laughter. Neighbors talking on their porches. Children chasing one another in the fading light. The ordinary sounds of life, steady and comforting. It reminded Emily how long it had been since she'd simply sat and talked without hurry, without agenda, without needing to be anything more than present. She turned to Ryan. "Do you ever think about those days?" He smiled. "Every now and then. The bookstore, the porch, the fireflies. It feels like another lifetime." "It does," she said quietly. "But I remember." Their eyes met briefly, not in the way of two people searching for something new, but in the way of two souls remembering something kind and familiar. A shared piece of time that once mattered. Ryan looked down, his voice softer now. "Back then, I didn't really understand what I was feeling. I just knew that the calm I felt when I was around you, it stayed with me even after I left." Emily listened, her gaze distant. "Maybe we both needed that calm," she said. "Life was moving too fast. You were trying to find direction, and I was trying to hold on to what we had at home." "Did you?" he asked gently. She thought about Daniel, his steady kindness, the long evenings, the life they had built together, brick by brick. She nodded slowly. "Yes, in a way, I did. It just looks different now. Love changes, you know? It becomes quieter, but it's still there." Ryan smiled at that, a genuine, peaceful smile. "That's a good kind of love." She returned the smile. "It is." For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that isn't empty but full of understanding. The air in the room felt warmer now, softer somehow. Emily stood and walked to the window. The sky outside was streaked with pink and violet, the last light of day melting into the horizon. She turned back toward Ryan, who was watching her with the same thoughtful calm he'd always had. "You've grown a lot," she said kindly. "I can see it." He chuckled lightly. "Well, time has a way of teaching us what really matters." "And what's that?" "That peace is worth more than anything," he said. "And honesty, even when it's hard." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Then I'm glad you came today." Ryan rose, setting his cup aside. "So am I." He looked around the room one last time at the photos, the books, the small pieces of a life that had continued quietly while he'd been away. There was no sadness in his expression now, only calm acceptance. "I should let you rest," he said. "It's getting late." Emily walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, the porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow across the steps. The evening air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet. "Take care of yourself, Ryan," she said softly. "You deserve to be happy." He looked at her with a gentle smile, one that carried gratitude more than anything else. "You too, Emily." When he walked away, she stayed by the door for a while, watching the fading light settle over the street. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something close. Not a chapter, not a relationship, but a small, unfinished emotion that finally found its place. She stepped back inside, closing the door behind her. The house felt calm again, not empty, but peaceful, as though something long unsettled had quietly been put to rest. And for the first time in a long while, Emily smiled to herself, feeling lighter, reminded that sometimes the heart doesn't need resolution. Sometimes it only needs understanding. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in pale light and soft sounds. Emily woke early, though she hadn't meant to. Sleep had come and gone in gentle waves, her mind replaying fragments of yesterday's conversation. Ryan's calm voice, the honesty in his words, the strange peace that followed. She stood by the window with her coffee, watching sunlight spill across the yard. The tulips Daniel had planted in the spring were finally opening, bright and full, bending slightly in the morning breeze. They looked like small symbols of life carrying on, delicate but certain. It was Saturday and Daniel was due home by evening. Just the thought of it made her heart settle. She missed his steady presence, the way he always found small ways to make things easier. A repaired light bulb, a new tea flavor he thought she'd like, a quiet good morning whispered before leaving for work. As she tidied the kitchen, the doorbell rang again. When she opened it, she found Ryan standing there hesitant, as if unsure if he should have come back. He looked the same, yet different somehow, lighter, but still carrying that thoughtful calm. "Ryan," she said, surprised, "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." He smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure if I should come, but I didn't want to leave things halfway," said. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Come in." They sat at the table again, though the air felt different today, clearer, steadier. The sunlight moved gently across the wood, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Finally, Ryan looked up, his expression sincere. "Emily, I need to say something, not to change anything, but to make peace with it," he began. "Yesterday, when I talked about the past, I realized something. It wasn't really about love. It was about what love taught me." She listened quietly, her eyes warm but calm. "When I was younger," he continued, "I used to think connection meant holding on. That if something felt right, you were supposed to keep it close no matter what. But watching you and Daniel over the years, seeing the way you care for each other, even in the quiet, ordinary days, made me understand that love isn't about possession. It's about gratitude. It's about wanting the best for someone, even when you're not part of it." Emily's heart softened. "That's a beautiful thing to realize." He smiled a little wistfully. "It took me a while, but I wanted you to know that I've let go of the old feelings, not because they didn't matter, but because they finally found their place. You were a reminder that kindness can change people. That's something I'll always carry." For a moment, the room filled with quiet emotion, not sadness, But the gentle kind of understanding that only time can bring. Emily reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over his. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly. "It means a lot, more than you probably realize." He nodded. "I just didn't want to leave anything unsaid. I didn't come here to make things complicated. I came to say thank you and goodbye in the right way." Her throat tightened a little. "Goodbye." He smiled faintly. "I've been offered a new job out west. I think it's time for me to start fresh." Something inside her shifted. Not sorrow, just a quiet acceptance. "That sounds good, Ryan. You deserve that fresh start." He looked around the room one last time at the framed photos, the sunlight, the familiar warmth of the house. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think peace was something you found in places. Now I think it's something you make choice by choice, day by day." Emily smiled. "I think you're right." They stood, and for a moment neither seemed to know what to say next. Finally, Emily stepped forward and gave him a brief, gentle hug, the kind shared between family who have been through something honest together. "Take care of yourself," she said. He nodded, his voice quiet. "You too, Emily, and tell Daniel I said thank you for everything." When he left, the door closed softly behind him. Emily stood there for a moment, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps on the walkway. The morning light touched her face, warm and calm. That evening, Daniel returned home. His luggage thudded gently against the floor, and before he could say a word, Emily walked up and wrapped her arms around him. He smiled, surprised but happy. "That's quite a welcome." "I missed you," she said simply. They spent the evening together, talking, laughing, catching up on the little things. It wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was real. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet normalcy, Emily realized how deeply she was grateful for the peace in her heart, for the love that had endured, and for the honesty that had gently untangled the past. Later that night, as she stood by the window again, the tulips swayed softly under the porch light. She thought of Ryan, his words, his calm goodbye, and the lessons he'd carried away. She smiled to herself, whispering into the quiet, "Sometimes love's greatest gift is letting it stay where it belongs." Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of spring through the open window. The world felt new again, not because anything had changed, but because she finally understood that peace isn't about what we hold on to. It's about what we choose to let rest gently in the heart. And in that understanding, Emily felt completely and quietly free.